Let's talk about constraints. So in the last video we saw how you can create your first end cloth simulation inside of Maya, and creating a dynamic cloth is pretty easy, but with the constraint it kind of gives you the reliability of changing and modifying your cloth even better. So today we will talk about constraint, how you can use them, what are constraints and what types of constraints are there, and what are the uses of them. So constraints are pretty easy thing to use, and they does give a kind of a nice touch to the overall end cloth simulation. So let's see how we can use them. So I'm going to start off by taking a simple plane here, and I'm going to move this up, scale this up right over here, and I'm going to take another cube, bring this up, and I'm going to scale this right about there. Alright, so I'm going to put it right over here, and I'm going to change my menu to FX. So here we have end cloth menu, and here we have the nConstraints menu. So the first thing is the component, and before getting into component I'm going to start off by using component to component, because before using component you need something to the nConstraint to work with. So you'll see why. So I'm going to scale this up now, and I'm going to bring this up closer towards this, and I'm just going to go to my top view, hit 4 on your keyboard to get into the wireframe, and from here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this end cloth material and this one as a passive collider. So if I play this now, the cloth falls exactly how it's supposed to be. So if I go to my face mode here, I can select this face and this face, and I can hold shift and I can select this primitive here, and I can go to nConstraints and I can select component to component. And what that does, it gives you this guidelines which represents how your component is kind of attaching to that primitive here. And if I play this now, as you can see, it holds your cloth perfectly. So what component to component is doing is basically taking this cloth's face and it's attaching to this primitive here, and that's how it's kind of making this guidelines to represent how this is going to be connecting to your overall design here. So I can go back to my outline, I can delete this, and I can select these faces again. I can select multiple faces if I want, and I can select this again, and I can go to nConstraint component to component. If I play this now, those faces will be attached. So I think I'm going to delete this constraint, and I'm going to select this one and this one, and I'm going to go with component to component. Alright, so we have this one. So component to component works like this. Now let's get into the component itself. So what component does is basically it's a extra stretchiness, or you can say extra bend to your overall cloth. So what I can do here is, let me just go to my plane here, and I can increase the subdivision to 20 and 20, and that will just get rid of the overall simulation here, because we have to go back to the first frame. And one thing you'll notice is the guidelines has been changed, and the reason is because we have changed the number of polygons subdivision we had. So we have to do this again. So before getting into a constraint, I highly suggest be sure about your topology, what kind of how many subdivisions you want on your overall cloth, because if you change after that you have to redo the overall constraint method again. So I'm going to go to component, and I think we're good to go. So we have something like this now, pretty nice cloth. So I'm going to select my cloth here, and let's go to component here. So what component does is basically an extra stretchiness, as I said. So I can select this, and instantly you'll see all these points, vertices kind of thing, and this will allow you to stretch your cloth even better, and you'll get this couple of more option. And as you can see, the constraint method has been set to the spring, not weld, not rubber band, only spring. So you have a couple of options like strength, how much strength you want on this. So let's play this first. So you have something like this, and I can lower the strength to something like 0.100, and let's play this now, and you'll see some gradual changes. I can also play with the overall glue strength, and if I change my glue strength, you'll notice how these guideline changes. If I let me just stop this simulation, and I can change the overall strength here on the glue here, and you don't see much happening. But if I play this, and let me just change this to something like a full power, you'll see these guidelines behaving now. So the glue is kind of holding the overall cloth together, and you can add a bit of a force in here to something like 0.2, and you'll see some cloth movement now. Alright, so you see some windiness going on. I can increase the amount of force, and you'll see more motion going on. I think that's too much, so I'm going to make it 0 again. So you can do this kind of stuff with this, and you can increase the number of iterations and so on. You can also add some drag if you want your cloth to be pretty slow moving like that. And I can play this again, and I can play around with the overall stretchiness, and if I change my stretchiness, you'll notice how my cloth is kind of behaving towards this. So it's holding more towards the rigidness, it's moving less. So you can see the overall look around here. So I can change this, and as I go lower and lower, you'll notice how the cloth is behaving. So I can go pretty low and you'll see some stretchiness going on. You can also change your constraint method to something like a weld, and instantly you'll see something craziness going on, because right now the overall constraint points is all over the plane. The reason it's all over the plane because the method was set to spring, and that's how it's treating the overall plane. But if you want to weld some points, we use the weld method, because right now the component is too much on this, so we cannot use this. But we can also go for rubber band, and that will give you kind of this kind of look, I guess. So I can go for something like a 10, maybe like 25 or 10, right? So you can do this kind of stuff. You can also add some bend and again add some force into this. All right, so let's get into the another constraint, which is the force field. And force field is kind of adding the force field to your overall cloth here, which we already get when you're using any type of constraint. For example, if I go to my force field here, you get this constraint overall, and you get this force field with the full force of value 1, and you have the strength again and the glue. But you get one more thing, and that is a fall off, that you see a sphere here. So I can move my fall off around here, and if I play this now, nothing happens. And the reason is because the force will only be affected anything that is inside of the overall fall off here. So if I move my fall off to something like maybe right about here, and if I play this now, you'll see the force affecting that part only. So I can make this lower to something right about there, so it's more reasonable, so we can see a little bit clearly, and now you'll see something is going on. So I can increase the force to something like a 2 here, and you'll see that kind of change going on. So I can move this to this corner and right about here, and let's see. And now you'll see some windiness going on from this side because the fall off has been set on the right side. So I can increase the number of force strength I have on this, and you'll see more force towards this. You can also do one thing if you want. You can do a simple animation. So I can go to my first frame, hit S on your keyboard to animate this, to add a key here. So I'm going to select this, hit S, and play this now. And right about there, I'm going to take another S to keyframe this, and from here right about there, I'm going to move this towards here. I'm going to hit S, and I'm going to lower this S and move it right about here, and then I can bring this out and S. Alright, so let's see what we have. Alright, so you see this kind of stuff going on now. So you can do pretty interesting thing with the overall force field here. You can create this kind of curtain or a cloth here, so you can do pretty amazing thing with this. So let's move on. The next thing we have is the point to surface, and I'm going to delete all of this. Let's take a cube here, and let's delete this. Let's take a sphere, and I'm going to take a cube, and I'm going to scale this up and bring this up. Alright, so I'm going to select this. Let's create an nCloth material, nCloth and passive collider. So I'm going to right click on my sphere and go to vertex mode, and I'm going to go to my front view, hit 4 on your keyboard to go into the wireframe mode, and I'm going to select these vertices here, and I'm going to hold shift on my keyboard and select this primitive, go to nConstraint and point to surface. So now if I play this here, let's go to the first frame, you'll see the visualization of the overall constraint here, how the plane is holding your overall cloth here. So if I play this now, you'll notice that those points are holding the overall sphere here. So I can select this, and you can also combine this with some preset here that you already get with the nCloth, like for an example airbag, and now you get this kind of a punching bag kind of thing going on, and now that holds perfectly. So point to surface is kind of one of the most interesting thing the constraint has. You can do pretty amazing thing with this, and you can, for example, you can also do one thing that will be, I'm going to duplicate this, and you can select these vertices. I'm going to add some division into this to maybe like a 5, 5 and 5, and let's create an N cloth passive collider, and I'm going to select these vertices and select this and point to surface. And if I play this now, you'll notice something like this. So it's holding the overall cube here. So you can do something like you can combine multiple things, like if you take a force field here, and I'm going to maybe just move this out a bit to right about there, and I can play this again, and I think I have to move this a little bit inwards, and I can make the force to something like a 4, and now you'll see something like this going on. So you can combine multiple constraints to get what kind of result you want on the overall design you have, and now you see something like this. Right, so you can do pretty interesting thing with this. So you get this kind of look. If you want, you can play around with the overall maybe like a heavy denim, and now you get this kind of thing, some bendy things going on, and this looks pretty interesting. So this was point to surface, one of the most interesting thing that I personally think. And I'm going to delete this one and this one as well. Alright, so let's take another cube. The next thing we have is slide on surface. So let's take something else. I'm going to take a simple cone here, and I'm going to take another plane, and I think I'm going to reduce the overall divisions I have to something like 0, and I'm going to, just so I can make the shape a little different. And from here, what I can do is shift right click and smooth this out to add some divisions in here. You can also do one thing, you can select this and go to modeling menu, mesh, and smooth it from here as well if you want. And what I'm going to do here is create this as an N cloth and this one as a passive collider, and I can select these vertices. I can shift select this primitive, and I can go to constraint and I can say slide on surface. So let's go to the first frame, and instantly you will see this guidelines going on. So what we have created is basically a cloth that is going to be kind of colliding with this primitive, but also sliding onto it. It's not going to stick towards it, but also moving around with it. So you'll get this kind of a spring kind of look. So if I play this now, so you see this kind of spring going on, right? So we have a slidable surface. So you see your primitive sliding off here and still attaching towards the overall. You can do one thing, you can go to your constraint and let me just pause this, and you can play around with the overall strength. So for example, right now it's stretching too much for me at least, so I can increase the value and see the overall difference. All right, so it's less stretching. I'm going to crank up the value even more. All right, if I make this 0.500, you don't get that much of a springy look. So you can control your constraint with the overall strength here and play around with different kinds of stuff. So right now you'll notice with the spring constraint that we are using right now, you get the spring as well, because it's kind of stretching on the overall guidelines here, and this is how you can control it. So I think this was pretty amazing as well. Let's move on. I'm going to delete everything, and the next thing we have is tearable surface. So what I can do for the tearable surface, I can select a simple plane here. I can scale this up and maybe change the division to 1 and 1, and I can make this as a passive collider. I can take a simple sphere here and make this, let me just lower the divisions to something like a 16 and 16, just so we can sim this pretty fast, and make this N cloth. So if I make this from the first frame play, you have something like this. So what I'm going to do here is basically, first of all, let me just change this to like a heavy denim maybe, and okay, this looks good. So I'm going to select some vertices here, like for example from here to here, or maybe just go to the front view overall, and I can select these vertices and this one as well, and I can go to nConstraint and I'm going to say tearable surface. And now you'll notice we have this guidelines going on. So if I play this now, those polygons or those part are going to be completely tearable. If I hit 3, you can't see much because the denim is too thin, but you'll see the surface tearing apart here. So I can take another sphere where you can do one thing, and instead of making some constraint points, what you can do is make the whole sphere as a tearable surface. So I can select this guy and I can say tearable surface. and now you'll see the whole points around the overall. For some reason it's not detecting the overall. Oh, sorry, I didn't make it the end cloth material. Yeah, so I'm going to lower this again, and if I go to the end constraint and make this tearable surface, now you'll see all these constraint points around the sphere. That means everything is tearable now, the whole surface is. So anything that is going to be apart from the threshold, if anything that reaches that threshold, it will break apart. So if I play this now, you see something like this. So it's now, I'm going to change the overall preset. I think I'm going to go with the overall, maybe like a t-shirt here. All right, and I don't think we can visualize much here because we see some tearable going on, but I think the overall preset on this, let me just take something like a thick leather, and I think we can visualize much better on this. All right, so I don't think we can see the overall result here. So what I'm going to do here is take another sphere, and I'm going to scale this up to something right about there, and let's make this in cloth. And although it's going to fall, and we'll get the same result, but instead I'm going to create a passive collider that's going to collide with this, so you can see how the tearable surface works. So let me just nConstrain this to see what kind of look we have already on this. And yeah, it's pretty still connected. So what I'm going to do here is go to my nConstraint, and you'll see max distance, the connection method. And as I said, the tearable surface has this kind of threshold. Anything that reaches that threshold, it will break apart. So I can increase this threshold as well, and now you see your tearable surface already being torn apart. So what you can do here is play around with the overall threshold here, and now you see the overall cloth falls apart because of the overall friction and gravity. So you just have to find that one golden number that goes with the overall sim you have, right? So now because of the pressure, you see the top part tearing apart. So one thing you can also do is I can make this 0.20, and I'm going to take another sphere, and I can scale this down, move this right about here, and I can hit S on my keyboard, and let me just see where. All right about there. So I think about right here, I'm going to move this around here and hit S, and I'm going to make this a passive collider. So let's see how that reacts. All right, so that was pretty fast, and now you see that the overall cloth has torn apart. So this is pretty interesting. You can create some stretchy tearing apart cloth. So this was pretty cinematic looking. This was pretty cool, I guess. And this is what you have right now. So you can play around with the preset to see how different kinds of stuff, if you don't want to mess around with the overall settings by yourself. So since we had the concrete, we can take heavy denim. All right, pretty cool. So that was the tearable surface, and one of my favorite constraints in the overall constraints. So one more thing that you can do is, just to make the overall process faster, is you can create an cloth material, and instead of manually selecting all the vertices you have, you can select this brush here, which is a selectable brush, and you can manually just go around with this and just paint on it and select anything that you like, and you can simply go to nConstraint and make it a tearable surface. Since we were not on the first frame, this does not work perfectly. So always make sure you go to the first frame. So I'm going to select this guy, and I'm going to paint this again and something like this, and go to a tearable surface, and now you have all the constraint points. So now if I play this now, you'll see everything breaks apart to that kind of point. So instead of doing a manual selection of your vertices by single click, you can just use a paint on brush to kind of select the overall primitive here, or the vertices. So you can do pretty interesting things. So I can take a simple cylinder, let me just tilt this towards something like this, and I can increase the subdivision height here and something like a 5 here, and let's make this cloth material. I'm going to go to my first frame, and I think I'm going to select my brush, and I can select this, and let's make this a tearable surface. So now if I play this here, all right, we don't see some pressurization over here. So what I'm going to do here is I can go to the object mode and rotate this towards here. And now if I play this, we should see something, and it's not breaking apart that easily. So what I'm going to do here is the first thing I'm going to do is change this to maybe a t-shirt, and the second thing is go to my dynamic constraint, and I'm going to change the value to 0.30. so it's just easy to break apart. So we need to kind of make the value even higher. So yeah, right about there where the overall threshold reaches, and now you have something like this. So I'm going to select my cylinder here and move this up, and now if I play this, since we have more pressure going on from the falling, and let me just select this and move this out of the way, you'll see some tearing apart going on right about here, as you can see. So some tearing apart here as well. So what you can do is you can increase the amount of distance that you have on the overall primitive you have with the end cloth. So I can make this higher. I can make an end cloth, and I can go to my first frame, and I can go to my paint menu, and I can select this, and I can go to tearable surface here, and from here if I play this now, alright, so you instantly see some tearing apart going on. So this is what you have now. So by increasing the distance, what you're doing is you're allowing the more pressure on the overall cloth you have there. So you can also make this sphere or the cloth shape even higher density mesh by using something like an airbag. Alright, so now you have much better threshold with the overall, so you have to dive in more with the overall. So if we give, I think getting into the overall, maybe chainmail. Alright, so this was pretty smooth, I guess, not easy to break apart, but you get the overall idea. So let's go to the next constraint, and that is transform. And transform is you can say pretty interesting thing. So till now, as we have seen, how the constraint works is based upon another primitive, that we need to have another primitive to connect it with, like whether it's going to be a slide on surface or point on surface or component to component, we need a support of different primitive. But for the you can say the constraint itself, the transform constraint, you don't need anything because the constraint itself creates another, you can say, a kind of a null. Like if, for example, you have a locator here which is an empty space, you can connect this or you can parent this to anything, and if I hit P, I can select this, I can select this, I can rotate this, and now you have parented the overall locator here with your cube. So you can do that kind of stuff with the transform constraint. So what I'm going to do here is, let's increase the division first. So this is what we have, and I'm going to go to my, let me just create the end cloth first, and let's go to the first frame and go to vertices, select these vertices, and from here I'm going to go to my constraints and transform constraint. So you see this kind of a locator thing over here, and if I play this now, you get this kind of look. Alright, so if I play this now, you get this kind of look, but instead going towards the overall constraint here, I can, let me just, alright, so now you can see the overall constraint has been changed because I moved my overall polygons here. So let me just select my vertices again. So I can select these two only, and I can go to transform constraint, and that will hold up perfectly. I think I'm going to add 2 more of these constraint here. So now if I play this, we have something like this. I think the overall cloth is too smooth on this, so I'm going to add something like a maybe airbag, just so we have a bit of a rigid cloth here. Now you'll see these polygons are being stretched. So for the overall transform constraint, you don't actually need anything. You just have to determine one point or edge, and you can pretty much use that transform constraint to play around with that, and that's all you have. So what you can do is, I can get rid of this, I can go to my first frame, I can get rid of this constraint here, and I can also select the overall edge here, like for example this one, and I can go to my end constraint and transform constraint, and if I play this now, as you can see, that constraint is holding the overall primitive, but the rest is completely cloth without any support, and you have this kind of thing going on like a cushion or something. So you can do this kind of stuff as well. So you can play around with the overall strength you have to get whatever kind of look you want. And if I lower the strength, as you can see, it's kind of slipping away to this part. I think the overall polygon subdivision on this is too high. we have to catch this to play this mode, but I don't think the overall need for the catch right now is necessary, since this was just a demonstration purpose. But you get the idea overall. So you can see there's guidelines over here that represents how much it's stretching over this. So you can play around with the strength value, how much you want on the overall bend or the spring kind of thing here, and you can create something like this, like a airbag or something. So you can do pretty interesting things with the overall cloth here. You can take a simple torus here. Let me just make this 0.4, and I'm going to duplicate this, and I can make this 0.5, and I can go to the top view here, and I can get rid of the faces here. Alright, so this is what we have, and I can make this nCloth, I can make this passive collider, go to the first frame, and I can play this now, and then you have something like this. And from here what you can do is, maybe you can select this cloth here, you can select this edge, and this one, and you can add a component to component. Go to the first frame, and as you can see the overall connection going on here, and then you can play with this. So what I can also do is I can select this cloth here, and I can add a kind of a maybe a tearable surface. Alright, and if I play this now, you don't see any tearing apart going on, but if I go to my constraint and add a bit of a force here to maybe like a higher value, to maybe about 10, so it's holding very nicely, and I think I have to lower the value or increase the value of the overall force here. And let me just go to my first frame. Alright, so we see some tearing apart going on right about here, because it can't hold anymore the overall primitive here, but the overall strength of the component here is pretty strong on this, but it's holding pretty nicely. So instead I can also do one thing. I can select this cloth here, and I can take a different force field right about there itself, and let me just pause this, and now you'll see that tearing apart going on. So it has completely torn apart our cloth because the force with this was too strong. So I can move this right about here, or maybe on this side, and I can play this. We don't see much tearing apart going on. I think I'm going to move more towards the Z direction here, and now you see this cloth tearing apart. So let's move it here. Alright, so now you see something like this. So pretty nice and cool thing that you have with the overall constraints. You can pretty much create amazing stuff with this. So dive into this, create something amazing with this, and in the next one we'll see how we can use constraints and nCloth to create some amazing stuff. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.